I wanted to go back in time a little bit and analyze Street Fighter 4 and the new characters that were introduced in Street Fighter 4, and I wanted to rank them. And ultimately, this is my own personal preference, so fine, hit us up with all of your disagreements in the comments, but you're wrong, objectively speaking. And I wanted to just go through and kind of talk about them because we will soon enough be looking at some new characters coming down the pike for Street Fighter 6. And this kind of a thing is just nice to have sort of floating around in your head and to be sort of updated on and ready for. So, without any further ado, this is the my ranking of the newcomer characters to Street Fighter 4. And we will start here. I believe there are 11 of them when everything was all said and done at the end of Ultra. And so the worst one here, number 1 or number 11, is El Fuerte. El
Mm.
Fuerte, I look at and I could not figure anything good about this character. That's not true, but there was he was not a fun character to fight against. He wasn't a very well fleshed out character in terms of his contributions to the story. Okay, so they started with a lucha libre character, which that's cool. I mean, that
Yeah,
totally makes
yeah.
sense for a fighting game character. It's a good place to start, but I mean, that wasn't Capcom's, original idea. I think the first lucha libre was actually invented by Rey Mysterio, and that was back in the WCW days. This is long before Street Fighter 4, so obviously they don't get credit for coming up with, Latino Mexican wrestling and all that kind of stuff. But what they did bring to the table was this cook, and he had a bunch of moves that were named after Mexican and Latino food dishes, like the amount of effort that went into it was okay. Grab a Mexican food, tostada. That's your adjective, and grab a noun, splash or press or whatever. There's your move, So guacamole spin or quesadilla bomb and fajita buster, whatever they were. I don't remember off the top of my head. It wasn't very inspired, and it felt like, I mean, as we've talked about it with Dream King Steven a handful of times, and he always points out like, dude, that's some borderline kind of racist, and I don't know if it was or
Yeah.
not. Kind of offensive, and I think the reason why is because it's just so haphazardly taking things out of a certain culture and saying, "Oh, this can help," you know what this is, and it's like
Yeah.
put a little more thought into it than that. So his story and his personality were kind of like whatever, just thrown together. His gameplay was so annoying to fight against. It was 50-50s through and through. And it was like, did you choose the right thing? No, it sucked to lose to him. I mean, okay, so some of the good things you could say is that Pepidai, he was very entertaining to watch, but not to play against. Like, I guarantee you, the people that were losing to Pepidai, it was fun for a highlight reel, sure, so we did get that out of it. But man, there wasn't a lot of good that came out of El Fuerte. And so without
Wasn't it Bugtooth who made a guy rage quit? Was it
probably.
Warwick? Warwick on screen? Like it was, but wasn't online rage quit? It was a real life rage quit. I think we can probably get the footage. We'll see. I don't know. But anyway, he's playing El Forte. Bucktooth is playing El Forte against Warwick, and he's doing all those mix-ups, and Warwick just goes, "I'm out." And just unplugs his controller, and he's gone.
Because that's not what I'm here
So
for, right? We
yeah,
talked
that's
about Killer Kai, or was it Killer Kai, or just regular Kai? Sorry.
yeah, Kai.
Who he played El Forte because he hated Street Fighter 4 and wanted to spread negativity in the experience, something along those lines. Those are not his exact words, but that I think is the gist of it. And he used El Fuerte to do that. So El Fuerte, I do not want to see you return. I'd like to see him return as maybe a background character, making some kind of soup or something like that at that best, but I do not want to see him unless they completely revamp things, change the way he plays, and at that point, is he even the same character anymore? I don't know. But El Forte, you suck.
Mm.
All right, so then the next character up, Decapre. I now this was interesting, and I'm not. I could be argued with about the placement of Decapre, because I think a lot of why she wasn't received so well was because of the build up and then the presentation of her. She was the very final character, and there was a lot of talk about like who's this going to be. That was kind of one of the last big hype mysteries of the story of Street Fighter 4. And then when she finally was revealed, everyone was like, "Wait, that's it?" She looks like not Cammy Light, but almost sort of like Cammy 2, and a lot of the same animations. Now, she really didn't function like Cammy in game. We'll get to that in a second. But there was a huge expectation, and when the curtain was finally removed, it just felt like a lot of steam was sort of kind of coming out of the balloon. And
Hmm.
like she had some cool moments, I guess, in competition. Some notable players like Knuckle and Infiltration used her. She has reasonably interesting moves, but the way she operated, at least for me, she was not a fun character to fight against. She was presented at the beginning of Street Fighter V because she was in the cinematic story trailer. And I remember people singing, and the responses were overwhelmingly like, "Oh, please, not Decapre for SF5." And she popped up in the
Hmm.
story mode where I think you actually play against her for a round in the story mode. So they designed her a little bit for 5, and people were like, "Please, not Decapre again." I think she could come back, and maybe she could come back for Street Fighter 6 after taking a break in 5, and maybe they reinvent her a little bit, and she's sort of divorced away from all the negativity that she sort of got when she was presented in Street Fighter 4. But when it came down to it, the actual execution and implementation of this character, it didn't resonate very well with me, and I don't think it resonated very well with a lot of other people. So there is potential for her if they change stuff, but as she was executed in SF4, not my favorite.
Yeah, that's a pretty fair placement for her on this list because again, Ono really did a really bad job with Decapre because he's like no one correctly predicted this, and it's like, dude, a bunch of people said the dolls, kind of thing as the
Hmm.
final characters and stuff, and just there was a lot of really bad stuff happening with the messaging around her and all that kind of stuff. I actually think her gameplay was really cool because I did play her a good bit, but I can't disagree with the placement at all. It's pretty fair.
Hmm. All right, so next up here on the list, Hakan. I initially wanted to put Hakan a little bit higher, but as I thought about it, he never made the splash that I think he could have. Now, he also didn't get played all that much because he came out and he was matter of fact a bad character. Everyone was talking about it in that sense, and I don't think that they were really wrong. We never saw much from him outside of Infiltration bringing him out for a one Evo top 8 against PR Balrog. And it's like, well, because that happened to be a particularly good matchup for Hakan, and PR Balrog probably wasn't ready for it because we never saw him. That was cool, but outside of that, I didn't see a lot him bringing a lot to the competitive side of things. And more often you hear about his hot wife than you do about anything that had to do with his gameplay and such. Now, Hakan was not very well explored. His surface was scratched, and that's about it. And so I would like to see him come back, and I would like to see him somewhat reinvented, and for people to explore him a little bit more. But with how little of a splash he made at the beginning of his in his initial run, I don't know if that's even in the cards or not. I will say that first of all, he's a grappling type character, and as we've said before in this podcast, it's not easy to balance grapplers because they can really quickly become overpowered. And then you tack on the fact that he has this kind of unique level up system, this sort of other mechanic. And when you do that with characters, as we've talked about many times with like the likes of Fong and such, that can be very polarizing, and they start to play a game that everybody else isn't playing, and then you go like, well, does this break him, or does the fact that he has to, in this case, oil up, make it so that he's at a huge disadvantage? But that's the kind of thing that really can swing things, and it's very, very difficult to balance this particular character because he's a grappler with a special mechanic. Like, I do not envy the task of a developer having to balance that character within a Street Fighter roster. So all in all, it's like that was a huge task to take on. He looks kind of weird. He never was all that great, and he kind of just fizzled away. So he didn't really piss anybody off or anything like that, but he also didn't amount to much.
He was kind of a troll character is what he ended up being. It was kind of a way of like trolling your company. And I know some people took him seriously, but it was just like oftentimes you just kind of saw him even, infiltration versus PR Balrog. Like it was infiltration kind of said after the fact, like I kind of, wanted to hype up the crowd and other stuff like that,
Mm.
and it wasn't, a legitimate, competitive pick. It was more of like, I wanted to generate hype by playing this character.
Mhm.
And yeah, that's, I mean, there's some stuff to say about Hakan, but usually it's mostly bad.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so the next one up on this list was originally, I guess I would say, it was a better placement, but I lowered their placement. Because now, keep in mind, this is talking about the analysis that comes from Street Fighter 4. And in the case of Seth, we had a huge update to the character that changed a lot, and I would say fixed a lot about him. And he's at the point now where I don't think that he's a lock for every Street Fighter moving forward. But if he were in every other one, I think that would be just fine. I think the character's in a pretty good place. But with where he was in SF4, he was sort of this somewhat bland, kind of like blank faceless entity, and then he had a lot of other characters' moves, which, okay, fair enough. We've seen that kind of a thing done before. He had a little bit of personality, but he was also very frustrating. Like he was super powered. He had everything, every tool, and they worked really well together. And the kind of play that was really effective with Seth, with the likes of like Online Tony and Punko, was this sort of like balls to the wall, just go for it, be crazy, and either I'm killing you or you're killing me, but I also have these really good tools, so I'm probably killing you. And that amounted to just like, dude, I feel like I'm playing against a boss, and he was a boss character, but you really don't want your boss characters to feel like boss characters in competitive modes.
Yeah, Seth was named after your lookalike, Seth Killian.
Killing.
You shouts to your Twitter profile up there. But I remember Seth Killian saying like, I'm not a fan of this character. Like, I get it's named after me. That's really cool. But the way this character plays is like, I forget the exact thing he said, but like I'll paraphrase and just say like it's kind of a little bit of like a slap in the face to traditional Street Fighter, like in how it's played, just because this character was a crazy entity. So there it is.
People talk about this is for you, Demon Curse. Talk about Nikali's strengths and his command grab and a three frame and an invincible DP and stuff. Yeah, and a dive kick. Seth had all that, but he had those in spades, and he had those in ways that worked so well with each other that you were afraid of all of them simultaneously, which made all of them simultaneously better and more effective. And it was hell. So, anyways, that's where Seth goes. Next up on the list, Abel. I wanted to put Abel higher on this as well, but as I thought about it, as I kind of boiled things down, it's like the character did not have didn't have almost any personality. Abel was in every cutscene you saw him, he was just like confused and wondering what was going on. Like, oh, am I supposed to be here? Do I like dogs? Who am I? And it's like fair enough. You got this wandering kind of like blank slate of a character to I don't know. That's a decent idea for a protagonist for the game, but he just never really amounted to much. He had some cool competitive showings where the likes of 801 Strider, again, Infiltration used him, I think, in an Evo top 8 towards the end of the game's life. And like in the earlier days, I remember seeing Juicebox. There was a lot of
Hmm.
cool
Yeah.
sequences that Abel was fun to watch. I don't know that he was necessarily that fun to play against because he, again, a grappling sort of 50-50 character. And in the earlier days, he was pretty broken in some significant ways. The most notable, of course, was when he had Brainless in its first iteration when Super dropped and he got that second Ultra combo that was just silly. And
And
in what
just
you
to
could do with
clarify
it.
on that, his Ultra 2 is called Breathless. The community renamed it to Brainless because of
Hmm.
how overpowered it was, and it got
Yeah.
nerfed right afterwards. But yeah.
Yeah, Ultra 1 is called Soulless, Ultra 2 is called Breathless, but we all knew it was brainless because it took no brain power to use effectively. Really quickly, for what it was, he would go into this crouching state, and then when the character or when the player released it, he would zip forward like almost across the whole screen and grab you, so you couldn't block it. I believe he had a hit of armor while he was in the crouching state, and then maybe also while he was moving forward, and he could cancel the crouching state if he decided he didn't want to do it. But what would happen was like he would activate just like out of nowhere while you're playing in neutral, and he could either go. Remember, you couldn't block this, so you had to neutral jump it. So maybe you guess a neutral jump, but if he didn't let it go, then you're coming down and he's just going to let it go as you come down and he's going to catch you as you're landing. It was a super goofy thing. But yeah, all in all, it's just like the character didn't add up to a ton. He could come back and they could try Abel again, and I think it would be okay and tweak stuff around a little bit. But as he existed there, he was okay, kind of like in middle of the road in terms of the newcomers, and that's why he is where he is. Next up on the list, Rufus. This is an interesting one because Rufus was all over the competitive scene, thanks to the likes of Justin Wong, Ricky Ortiz, a few others. I gotta shout out Brent as, of course, the third best Rufus, as we would call him often. But he was such an off-putting character. He's the stereotypical fat American, and I believe he's the first Street Fighter character to officially be fat, as opposed to like E Honda having like abs on the outside of his sumo. E Honda gets a pass. Rufus was like actual jelly.
Hmm.
I think that's the case. And so he wasn't the most. He was gross, and he was sort of annoying. And then he had some of the absolute best moves ever. And that didn't make him the best character. He was never really the best character, but he had like a seemingly height restrictionless dive kick. Messiah kick, we often called it the Jesus kicks because it was like one of, if not the best reversal in the game. And every single road, if Rufus hit you from any angle or any distance or whatever, it seemed like he could combo into his ultra. So he had big time damage. He obviously had some drawbacks in his competitive side because he wasn't, like I said, the best. He wasn't just winning everything. But all in all, it's like Rufus players weren't super happy to play him, and people that were playing against him weren't super happy to play against him.
And just real quick on Rufus, like I loved his quotes and stuff that he had in there.
His
But
like
he's another
paragraph
character
long
like,
quotes.
yeah, El Fuerte, where I'm like, how would this character play in 2021 right now? Like, what would that be like? And it's kind of an interesting thing because some of the racial stereotypes, that
Mhm.
Capcom kind of gets away with. I don't know exactly if they're kosher or not. It's kind of an interesting thing. But it's also like there's so many of them in these games, and that's kind of like it's played for humor. It's not a serious type of thing, and so that's kind of like where they tend to operate at. But it's going to be kind of interesting if some of these characters go away for the simple fact that maybe this is not like a 2021 type of thing, or wherever the next game comes, like you don't, maybe some of these characters are like too offensive to include how they were before. I almost wonder if that's going to happen, but and Rufus would be maybe one of those, but yeah.
Okay, so that was Rufus. Next up on the list, Oni. This is another character that you could argue with me about, and maybe we could move him around a little bit. I thought Oni was really cool. He is a Shoto, but he's a big, buff, like evolved version of Akuma, one of the most popular characters in Street Fighter, bar none. And he dealt a bunch of damage. He had some really cool longer combos. So those that wanted to do like the long combo thing and have some execution and some pizzazz, they could find that in Oni. Stuff like an air raging demon, but it wasn't necessarily overpowered. You weren't seeing that kind of being used and abused. In fact, I don't feel like Oni got explored quite enough to really get a fair shake, and I'm sad about that because he seems like a matter of fact, like he's a win unless you really screw things up, and I don't feel like Capcom really screwed things up with him. But at the end of the day, Super Saiyan Akuma just didn't get all that much acknowledgement. I don't recall many pros using him, and it was kind of sad because I thought he had so much potential and he could become, he's the evil Ryu and Oni, and those two actually came together. Ryu and Akuma's like ascended darker forms. That's really cool, and it ties in very well to who those characters are and to the game's overall story. And yet Oni just never was it. So, but I wanted to ask you, what were some of your thoughts on him? Because to me, he's sort of an anomaly, and maybe you have a piece of the puzzle I haven't thought about.
Yeah, he was, another vein of the evil Ryu kind of like spin-off type stuff, or like what is it, Violent Kin and all that. And I
Yeah.
think that I think people kind of appreciate the evil Ryu thing a little bit more because of, it's kind of got more of like a plot thread that goes with it, where Oni was just kind of a what if kind of character, or if what is it, Akuma completely succumbed to the Satsui no Hado or whatever, he would become Oni. And so it was an interesting kind of like what if scenario, but I don't think he had enough of an impact to make him kind of a returning character. And it takes advantage of all the Shoto's like popularity and all that kind of stuff, like we know from the CFN stats. Shotos are always way up there. But there's probably, I think that what Capcom will do is like probably make like a Gotetsu like type of Shoto or someone like that instead of doing Oni again. At least I would hope. That would be a character I'd much rather see than Oni return.
All right, next one up. Now, if it were up to me, and I guess it is up to me, but I'm also trying to be fair in terms of, more than just who do I like. But obviously, my number one guy is, and this isn't number one, This is actually fourth from the top. Gouken. This character did not get played all that often. He wasn't popular, but man, obviously being one of the more notable Gouken players, and there weren't a ton of us, but people would talk to me about him a lot, and they would always say he is so cool. The way that he plays is so cool, and I think a lot of it was maybe he wasn't technical, but maybe people couldn't see the cool parts of his gameplay, the fun and the interesting parts of his gameplay, setting up traps zoning wise with the high and regular fireballs, which were very fast, and then he could follow up with that cool either his second ultra combo, which was the Denjin Hadouken, or his rush palm. I think he had a lot of really cool moves. He hit like a truck, which that was obviously a lot of fun. Parry into super was one of the coolest things. That every time I was able to hit that, and it was in like a, I got a major, or there's anything of a crowd, you'd always get people reacting to that kind of a thing. So I think he was a super hype character. Um, he is Akuma's brother, like the yin to Akuma's yang, the light to Akuma's darkness. Well, again, one of the most popular characters in all of Street Fighter. This is his legitimate brother, and like sort of the opposite answer to Akuma. That's really cool. He's the master of Ryu and Ken. There's points there in terms of like he's got a really cool place in the story, and I think I mean, obviously I would want to know more about him and see more of his character fleshed out. They did go and shamelessly retcon his story from having been killed to, well, he was sleeping for a couple of years after getting his. They find him, what, like beaten and dead in the dojo. They presume him dead, and apparently they're just like, I don't know, man, this sucks, but happy hour is only going on for another 45 minutes. We got to get out of here. And they just leave him there. And then after a few years, he wakes up, muscle atrophy be damned, because he's one of the most notably buff characters. And I gotta wonder why people didn't play him in the first place, given their reactions, given how much hype was around him once, some of us did play him and showed some of his potential. And it might be that he's the old man character, and in these sorts of games, maybe the expectation is more like the Gen, like they look frail, but they have so much ability and there's so much balance in their understanding and such that they're, they in what is it, Kung Fu Panda, like the single pinky or whatever, that kind of like minimalist but super ability sort of a thing. Gouken's this walking tank of a character, and maybe that didn't jive with people from like the character select screen. I'm not sure. But man, this is such a cool character. The way he plays, we've talked about figures like Makoto not being a very good fit for something like Street Fighter V because of just how much of how much offense and how much she just gets up in your face. So it's like certain characters maybe don't fit certain molds of certain games. But Gouken's pretty well rounded. He's like
Yeah.
fireballs and zoning, but he also likes to sort of rush down, and he plays a certain mid game, and he wasn't amazing at any of those, maybe zoning. But I don't think like that would be a deal breaker for any future games. I think you could make him and his existing toolkit fit to most styles. So I feel like he's a really good character that could come back, no problem. Really good story. But I'd also like to hear your 2 cents on
Yeah,
him.
Gouken got you hired here, man. We loved watching your Gouken, and it was like, and you applied for a job, and we're like, hell yeah, like we love watching your Gouken. You're a good writer, and you're not too much of a jerk to the people here. You're
Something else, by the way, people, he was regarded as relatively low tier, like he couldn't get the job
yeah.
done, and like fair enough. But man, both in the Arizona scene, and I remember Chris T vividly saying, Gouken is broken, bro. Because people would say, dude, he's secretly high tier. Like people just don't know. And a lot of how, like I've said about
They
Lucia,
banned him
because
from tournament. There was a couple of random companies who got into FGC tournaments,
Mm,
and they had no idea that Gouken was low tier and stuff like that, and so they banned like him and like Oni or something like that from tournaments
sure.
because the boss characters, and they're like, oh, can't have these boss characters in here, so he was banned from tournament, man. But scrubby tournaments that didn't know what they were doing. But anyway, you were saying,
I just thought he was a really good idea for a
yeah.
character, and I hope he comes back.
He's Sheng Long, like it's the EGM Electronic Gaming Monthly, April Fool's joke, the infamous one. That's Sheng Long. That's Gouken, kind of thing. And there was so much hype with this character. I remember one of the things from Japan that they said is, he came back like he was, you know, put to sleep by Akuma or whatever the crap he is, and so he's back. And in Japan, apparently, that's not a thing like that you have to explain. but they're like in America, they're like, we actually have to come up with an explanation for this. And to the life of me, I don't remember what that explanation was, except for like he was asleep instead or something like that. But typical Capcom explanation that leaves a lot to be desired. I think the character was a pretty big hit. I definitely want to see him back in Street Fighter 6. He's so instrumental to what Street Fighter is, and I actually have kind of been disappointed he didn't come back for 5. Like I was kind of always holding out hope that he would. I This is one of my favorite characters in the universe. I want him back. But yeah.
Yo tambien. Um, okay, so number three, we're in the top three now of the ranked characters for the newcomers to Street Fighter 4. Now, this is kind of a shock because you don't think of this character as a newcomer, but this was the very first time that she was playable in a Street Fighter game, and that is Poison. Poison was, she's already got a lot of charisma. People know who she was from Final Fight and from her appearances in Third Strike. But this was actually us being able to play as her. She came in very late in the game, and yet she still got a bunch of attention. She was a decently high tier. She had really good zoning. She was immediately welcomed back into Street Fighter V with just about as much hype and just about as much fan passion and such. She's interesting. She's a little controversial. She's a little sexy. She's good. She was a well done character and continues to be so. And now she might have evolved into a household name. It might be that you see Poison more often than not in future Street Fighters. But that all started because, well, maybe not didn't start, but a huge part of that is because of how she was executed in Street Fighter 4. And I think she was really well done.
Yeah, I like her quite a bit in 5 as well. Great character, should be a staple pretty much going forward, in my opinion. Get her in there. I know some people are not really happy with, her over like, maybe Guy, or, other Final Fight characters, but I think she's right up there. She's a great character. Very much a home run for Capcom.
Yeah. All right, number two, Sea Viper. I don't know famously, but at least within like the SoCal crowd, famously hated Viper because she felt like a Marvel versus Capcom character with her high jumps and her left-right mix-ups and all this craziness and such. And by the way, I played Latif a lot. And so you can, understand why maybe I didn't have a great time fighting against Viper. That said, I cannot deny how much of a draw this character was. I think she was very well designed. She was, again, sexy. That's gonna do something for you. She had cool like spy gadget, electricity, and fire moves. And then she was also a mom. She was a MILF. It's like, dude, she had a lot going for her. She was hard to play, but she was also rewarding in that if you could get through her technical boundaries, you could do some really cool stuff. And there were some really notable Vipers. Obviously, Latif and probably Wolfkrone come to mind first. And there's also like Jace the Ace and a handful of others that she really had a presence. And then there's always been this want for her to come back in 5, so that tells you something too. So while I wasn't a huge fan of the way she played, because like again, I felt like she was playing more Marvel versus Capcom in a Street Fighter game, and that's like a really huge advantage. I think a little tweaking to that, she's a really good new addition. Like people like her. She can fit into a Street Fighter game, and yeah, so she's number 2 overall.
Yeah, she's a classic example of a high tier character, but highly technical. She was one of the most absolute difficult characters to play in the entire game, and yet she still maintained popularity. People liked her. She was based on Angelina Jolie. Great call there from Capcom to take a very pretty and famous actress and basically kind of adapt her into the game. It worked out really well.
Tomb Raider, huh? Okay, and then number 1, you guys probably knew it from the beginning, but now through the process of elimination, brute force, whatever it is, it's Juri. I mean, Juri's fine as far as my personal likings for whatever, but Juri has been like a phenomenon in terms of like how much fans have just loved her, swoon over her. She's so popular in so many ways, and widely seen as unfortunately low tier in Street Fighter 5, but she's got such a fan base, and it just was like matter of fact. Juri came out and just she has the magic. She was the it girl of SF4, and to say that like she's clearly the biggest success in terms of new characters introduced. Juri she'll be a DLC character probably in every game. Like I don't see how Capcom. I mean, I don't know their numbers, but just based on how people love this character so much, Capcom probably shoot themselves in the foot, or maybe rather miss out on big opportunities for not bringing her around. People love her style. She's got so much personality. She resonates with so many people. She's a waifu. She's badass. All this kind of stuff. And at the end of the day, like Juri, just there's no denying that she was a very well made character, and all of a sudden now has a spot at the Street Fighter table. So any other thoughts on
Yeah,
Juri?
no, she was really in touch with her sexuality. Hit a huge part of the FGC, the Korean scene, and it was like, great representation, a great character. They made the film around her and stuff like that. It was I really like Juri quite a bit. And again, as you say, unfortunately low tier in Street Fighter V. She's one of the characters you and I have actually advocated for quite a bit in terms of not getting enough in these
She's
balance patches. Even though we play some very good Juri players.
number
And
2 last month
yeah.
in the highest ranks online.
Yeah.
But yes,
So, but yeah, it's a great. That's if Juri's not in these future games as a DLC character, I think they did something wrong. So
no. So there's the list. The ranked ordering of the new characters that were brought in during Street Fighter 4. Hit us up in the comments as to whether or not you agree, or if you feel like you want to offer your wrong opinions, you can do that too.
when I told you guys before that John wasn't too much of a jerk when we hired him, well, that's kind of changed over the years. Sorry, John, blow you up here, especially but if people watch us on the regular, they're used to it. They probably think I'm the bigger asshole, which is probably correct.